Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, From Prompting to AI Workflows, Building Reliable Automations. My name is Matt Brown, and I will be your host for today. First up, I'd love to hear where everyone is tuning in from. Go ahead and tell us where you're based in the chat. I can start. I'm from Chicago. Hello from the rainy Lincoln Park. Fall has arrived here, and it's starting to get a little chilly here. But let us know where you're from, and I'll move on here and get our housekeeping items out of the way. So the first up is just a reminder that this is a live webinar with live folks available, myself included, available for your questions throughout the webinar. Go ahead and enter those questions in the Q&A box at the bottom right of your screen, not in the chat box, so that it doesn't get lost. We will have time for Q&A at the end, so just put your questions there, upvote others. And the final piece here is just, if you run into any technical issues along the way, you can usually you can just fix everything with a quick refresh. We also recommend using Google Chrome as our recommended browser, which usually solves everything. So yeah, before we start the session, I'll also kick things off with a quick poll just to understand the AI experience level of our audience. Let me trigger that here. So we'll be excited to hear if everyone feels like a beginner, intermediate, or advanced. And while that poll runs, I will move on to the fun part. I'm excited to introduce to everyone Bryan Helmig, the co-founder and CTO here at Zapier. I'm very excited for a fun session with you today, Bryan. Go ahead and take it away.
Hey folks, I'm Bryan. I'm co-founder and CTO here at Zapier. I'm not quite in the Chicago area, but not far away, Matt. I'm in St. Louis, and we've been still hanging on with that nice hot summer, long summer into the fall weather. But excited for those crisp mornings coming soon, I hope. But yeah, I'm super jazzed to talk a little bit today about building reliable automations where you have AI as one of those big pieces. And I'm going to go through this agenda, but I encourage folks, if you got questions or you're curious about stuff, throw them in there and we can cover them as we go. This will be definitely something that I've spent a lot of time on, and I'd love to share a little bit of the way I think about stuff, but I'm really curious about y'all's experiences as well, your all's questions, because I think that would really help us kind of land on some more pertinent information. So this is the agenda. We're going to cover the context gap. So at the core, when you're building AI automations, you really want to be thinking about what information do I need to feed it? How can I give it clear instructions? I kind of think of it less around prompt engineering nowadays and more about context engineering. You might have heard that term come up, and we'll kind of talk a little about what that means. We'll talk a little bit about chat. Most folks are familiar with ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or any of these. And where is it similar? Where is it different from automation, and kind of how to use that familiarity to drive your intuition around building automations. We're going to talk about building prompts, doing prompts, and a little bit of the context engineering, the framework I use. This is more of an art than a science. And then we'll talk about, I think, the heart of this conversation, which is iteration, evaluation. How do you know it's actually working? Because if you're like me, you've noticed that AI sometimes just nails it and sometimes just goes off in the woods and you're like, what are you doing? And then how do you really make sure that that's not happening when you have these things turned on live? They're interacting with clients, they're interacting with customers, they're interacting with colleagues. How do you make that more rigorously handled? We'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'll share some of the ways that I do this, both by this bunch of Zapier tools and how I string them together. And then we're also working on some newer tools, some proof of concepts and prototypes that may make their way into Zapier proper someday in the future. So I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on that as well. So let's get started here. So when I talk about the context gap, it basically just boils down to treating your AI, your assistant, your chatbot, or your automation as if it was, just woke up, just joined your company, and it's like, I'm ready to go. And they have a lot of world knowledge, but not a lot of knowledge around what exactly do you want me to do? What information do I have? And what I really like to do is talk about this is in terms of like a chat session versus kind of a Zapier workflow. In a chat session, you commonly start a chat. You talk, you share some thoughts, and there's some memory going on here of past responses. And ChatGPT is starting to do this in more subtle ways. It used to be that every conversation you started up was a cold start, right? But now it's a little bit fuzzier. There's some personalization, there's some memory there. And often you're probably thinking the same things like, do I just continue this conversation? Or do I start a new conversation? If you're making that thought, if you're having that thought, you're basically doing the context management that we're going to really get into, right? And these AIs they're pretty good at kind of in picking up on what you mean rather than what you say. But also as these models get a little more precise with the reasoning models coming along, a lot of times they start to be more specific about what you say and not what you mean. So these things change as well. So these are the kinds of things that I always like to bring up because it's a bit of a moving target, and our experiences are formed through the interactions, right, with these products, and they really kind of change the way that we think about stuff. So, but in a Zapier workflow, you're really doing a lot of context engineering because let's say you have a Zap and it's got some trigger, could be a form, could be anything, and you have it running into an AI step. By default, that AI step, and maybe it's doing some lead qualification, that's a super common use case. It doesn't know a lot about your business, right? It doesn't remember what it responded to that last lead, last week. It kind of loses that context each time it boots up as this cold start, right? So that means you really want to stuff as much of that information as you can into that prompt. And that's where we start to getting into stuff like, hey, how do we get examples in there, clear instructions, right? But one thing that we'll get into later is even when you apply a fix to the most recent time that you did something wrong, an old one that came through might have degraded. And it's really tricky to kind of keep all of those in your mind so that as you work on these one by one, you're generally making it better and better. But how sure are you that the older examples that came through are still as good as what you'd like them to be relative to the ones that you have coming through? So these are just a lot of things that you have to really be thinking about when you're building these. You really want to be thinking about the context. What information are you feeding that? How are you prompting it? What information are you giving it, especially for subjective tasks? These are the kinds of things that we'll be spending time on today. And let's hop on to the next one. So first of all, the mindset shift that I recommend folks have is to really kind of hone in on that idea where whenever you're in ChatGPT, and there's really kind of three things that I kind of point to. In ChatGPT, you can start a new conversation or you can continue a new conversation, right? That's a good one to kind of like key off of. If you find yourself leaning to one or the other, just kind of really wonder like, why are you doing that? Because that will serve you really well as you start building automations. And the other one is there's this new feature in ChatGPT and a lot of these chatbots that have more memory, so that you can do an anonymous or private chat session. And that kind of turns off some of those memory capabilities, which means you get an even more pristine experience talking to the model. That means it has less awareness of who you are. And that can be sometimes desirable if you want to ask some question about this or about that, and you don't want it to know, oh, you're this person doing this. And that can color its responses. And maybe you just want a more generic global kind of response. And that's when you might reach for those things. And that stateless, that sort of anonymous conversation, that's a little bit closer to the de facto way that, let's say, an AI step in Zapier might work. So that's a kind of a good proxy I often bring to people is like, well, think about these three things: an anonymous chat in ChatGPT, continuing an existing chat versus starting a new chat. Each of those have a different kind of flavor. And I'd say, for the most pristine new context would be an anonymous chat because it knows nothing really about you. A new conversation kind of gets rid of those old messages. And then, continuing conversation is definitely the one that has like the highest context for this. So that's one thing that I really, really recommend people think about. And then there's some situations where you're going to have to do a lot more work on the context side. If there's more subjective goals, right? You might not be in a place where you could, brain dump every single thing that you might need to consider because you'll know it when you see it, right? So that's that kind of class that kind of pushes us into the more iterative approach versus the more objective sorts of things where it's like, hey, I want you to split this, first name, last name, or pull out the email address. Or these are very objective and very clear. You can define those really simply, right? And you probably don't need to get into an iteration sort of mindset. You can just kind of one-shot it and kind of get going. So these are the ways that I talk about kind of the foundation setting for what does it mean to have a chat experience versus a more automation experience. Let's hop on to the next one. The next thing is really around the parts to consider inside of a prompt. So this is kind of like prompting 101, right? So you may have seen this often. You got things like persona and role, like you're a this or you're a that. You have your goals and your instructions. And this is becoming more important as reasoning models come along. So if you think of the GPT-5s, the Grok 4s, even some of the Sonnet for the Anthropic models, Gemini is introducing this. And they're a lot more persnickety about your instructions. So if you say, do this or do that, it's going to try to do those things. And if you were kind of more like, well, I'd rather you do what I mean, not what I say, that works a little bit less effectively. We have these models that are a little more specific, how to try to follow stuff. And that's for things like exchange, can be distracting, right? And for examples, this nice two that really matter inside context inputs and outputs. Inputs, you really want to be thinking about what information do you need to do a good answer here. That's really crucial because a failure mode I see folks getting into when they use these AI models is more or less like, I just kind of assume the model is like super smart and knows all these things. And they do have a lot of world knowledge, but they may not have the information they need for that particular task. So think of things like, if you're going to do lead qualification, first name, you can't qualify a lead on first name, right? You need industry, company size, what role it is, right? And then when you talk about the prompt, well, now you need to tell the LLM how to use that input information, right? So, hey, when you see this industry, that works really great for us. If you see this industry, not great for us, and here's why. Offering that kind of context can help it hone in on what it actually needs to do. And it's both, right? Without those inputs, it doesn't know what to do. It's going to be just making things up. And without those kind of clear guidelines on how to interpret those inputs, it's not going to kind of bring your subjective knowledge encoded into that prompt. It's not going to be able to perform adequately. And then, of course, output formatting. Like, how do you want this to go into your downstream steps? I'll show some examples here in a little bit, building off this lead qualification example. And we'll kind of get into some of the ways you can leverage these outputs and supplement them to give you even more insight into, like, why is it doing this? Why is it doing that? And drive an iteration cycle that makes it much better. But I'll definitely say before we move on, this is more of an art than a science, but there are ways to turn this a little more sciencey, right? The science is really just about, writing things down and testing things and hypotheses. And art is more like, I just tweaked the prompt and it seems better. Like, that's more the art side of it. The science side is, I tweaked the prompt and I ran it against my last 10 examples and they seem better universally. Now we're getting into more like science side and the evaluation side. And you can have a lot more confidence about the automations you're bringing because you can actually see them working across a wide swath of inputs. And you can even be tricky and try to have those cases that are hard to do correctly and fix those. Or you can find those good cases and make sure that they don't regress and go back. So you're kind of chasing ghosts as this thing goes into production. So that's one way I think about the framework. So let's hop over to the process. So my idea of how we do iteration is often, I'll start with kind of a first approximation of knowing what it is I want to do. We'll go with the lead qualification one because I think it's one that most people get. You're going to need some of those inputs, right? You're going to need the prompt itself, and you're going to need those outputs. But what you can do beyond just kind of creating, and this is the Zap you all know could be a form trigger, AI qualifier, send it to your CRM, right? Maybe a filter in there. If it's not qualified, don't send it to the CRM, right? If it is qualified, send it to the CRM. If it's a really hot lead, maybe you send a message in Slack to your team, right? And kind of building this automation. But the thing I would posit you probably haven't done is to clone that Zap, swap out those triggers and those actions, and start to replace that with things like a table or a spreadsheet that has examples that you can iterate on. And that's where we really get into this kind of test suite idea, this evaluation idea, where we have different columns that represent your inputs. You have your ideal output, the kind of ground truth. And then you got your column C, which is what the AI actually output. And really what you want to be doing is, as you work through your Zap, and maybe you turn it on, and sometimes people even add like a human in the loop step so that they can really review these. As you find things that don't work quite right, you want to add it to that table so that you can go through and you can actually work on the prompt. That, I think, is really kind of the golden rule. Is like, you find something that doesn't work, you add it to the table, you tweak the prompt, you run them all in, and you just kind of double check that it's now doing better for that new one you just added, but it's not getting worse for those old ones that you've had for a long time. That's really kind of where this turns from art into science. And that's kind of what we're going to demo today and go into a little bit of behind the scenes. But let's hop on to the next slide here. So talking about like just Zapier, like why Zapier is like really powerful for this. One thing I always love sharing with customers, especially those who are familiar with ChatGPT, maybe this helps you kind of explain Zapier to your colleagues and friends and so forth, is if you talk to ChatGPT, it can do a lot of stuff for you. It can talk to you and give you good ideas, all kinds of great advice. But it's limited to when you call it, right, or send it a message, it can respond back. It's not really great at waking up in the middle of the night and handling that lead. That's not really what it's built for, right? And then you look at something like, oh, I actually want you to go off and send this email or do this thing for me, right? If you're not kind of monitoring it or you're not locking it down with respect to what you want it to do, that can be a little bit scary, right? So giving ChatGPT tools via some of these new capabilities like MCP, that can be a little bit unnerving because you want to double check that it's doing the right thing. So I often like talking about it in that way, where it's like, okay, for Zapier, for these kind of AI workflows, you can have it run at night, trigger off of any sort of input, do their more constrained AI steps. And then after that, send it to different systems. And you don't have to worry about the AI going off and doing something that it shouldn't be doing, but you also don't have to be awake to ask ChatGPT to do the thing. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. And to me, that's really what I like to use as an explainer for how you use AI in automation. And with Zapier, you can use our tables features to build a lot of these really powerful systems that you hop into Zapier, you can play around with the table, you can tweak, you can iterate. You can do a lot of you can build a lot of these systems, and I'll show you here in a minute how you can do that, where you have your table, and when you made a change to the prompt, you click the buttons for all the ones you want to test, and they go through, and you're able to see how the new prompt has performed. And this is not something special that is like super complicated to build, but it does take a little bit of awareness of some of the capabilities Zapier has, and just how you can click them together to build these really interesting and powerful capabilities. And they don't have to be AI only. We have people building all kinds of interesting things with tables and Zaps and forms and interfaces and chatbots. There's a lot of really cool stuff you can build, but this is just one way you can configure the Lego blocks to build this prompt iteration to get that AI reliability way up and have a lot more confidence about the AI features you're shipping to your customers, right? So let's hop on to the next slide here. Now it's time for the demo. Let me see if I can get my screen to share properly, and we will go through this. And if you guys got questions, I would definitely encourage you all to add them, and I'd be happy to grab those, Matt, if you've got any that pop up. Okay, so what you see here is a pretty simple Zap. It shouldn't be something that is looks too foreign. Basically, we have a form. It's a lead form. When it's submitted, we do some lead scoring, and the context kind of engineering that we've done is we pass it the full name, the email address, the role, and the company name, and we have a pretty lightweight prompt, right? Just to kind of get us started. Then we have this save to database. This is just saving it to a table. I'll get into that in a minute. And then of course, sending it to our CRM on the other end. And you can imagine that this little, save to Zapier Tables is a little bonus thing, kind of sneak peek into what we're going to do in a minute. But these 3 steps: trigger on a form, do your lead scoring with AI, send to your CRM. Very kind of classic use case for Zapier, where you do some lead scoring. But the question becomes, well, how are we judging and evaluating the outputs of this? I know that it's doing great, because what might be great for a lead for my company and your company, companies might be different. It just really depends on that. And that's really where we're getting into the patient evaluation side of things. So again, an idea of what this lead form is like. It's something like this. Again, this is an example. And what you want to do is take this Zap, make a clone of this Zap, so that your prompt input fields and the same output fields. Really ask it to say, hey, why are you giving it this score? And sometimes it really help us debug making these decisions, because you ask it to output a score and doesn't explain its reasoning. Sometimes it can be really, really difficult to just understand, like, why did you do that? Why did you give it a bad score? And if you ask it to output a field for why that is, then it can really help you kind of look into the reasoning that the model is using to get to that score. We can help you write better prompts. So anyways, what you want to do is clone this app, and that's what this one is. And you want to replace that trigger with a trigger off of the table. And I'll show you the table here in a moment. And it's a button push. Same prompt here. Once you get into this, let's go into edit so we can kind of see it. Same exact prompt. And then we're going to go up and we're going to update that same record that we clicked off that button with the actual lead score and the actual reasoning, the why. So just to summarize what that's doing, here's your normal Zap. It's got a firm lead score. We're saving it to tables, sending it to the CRM. We're cloning it, swapping out there for the button push. We're keying that prompt, and we're keying this table, getting rid of that CRM step so that it updates the table. And instead of saving all the details, first name, last name, email, what we're doing is we're finding that exact row and we're putting out the actual scores and the actual reasoning from that prompt. And this is what it looks like inside of the table. What we actually have here is a handful of different fields. And if this feels a little confusing, please throw your questions in here. But once you kind of understand what we're going for, hopefully it'll all click for you. What we want to do, the final thing that we want, is to be able to click retest prompt. And what it's going to do is fire this app. It's going to run all of my full name, email address, role, company through the prompt. It's going to get the people and the why, and it's going to dump it back in here. And what we're going to do on our side is go in and provide what we expect it to be. Like, hey, I took a look at this person. In this case, it's me, right? And I'm going to say, you know what? For us, that's not a good lead, right? Let's say we have a different company where we're selling, some particular thing that's not great for CTOs or anything like that. We really want like technical product managers or something like that. So you can see that the expected score that I win and I change, and maybe I'll say, okay, it should actually be a 4. And I talk a little bit about why that is in this. This is me showing the model, this is kind of what I expect. And then the actual lead score, which came through this, you can see that it got a 9. And it says it's a high quality lead. It has a whole bunch in there. So we can just kind of eyeball this and say, okay, that's not great, right? That's not what we wanted because it's too high. So what we could go and do, and this is bad prompting practice. I'll just tell you right now. Let's say CTOs are not good leads. We want more like IC level leads, right? We'll do that. And then we're going to go ahead and finish that. And then we're going to go ahead and publish it. Go ahead and publish. And now we have a new prompt that we're ready to test. But notably, we're not actually changing the live prompt. We're not going to change that live prompt until we're happy. So this is turned on and we're ready to test our new prompt. So what we want to do is go over here, click this retest prompt button, and it's going to run the Zap we just enabled. So if we go in here, we can probably even get in here and pull this in. Hopefully it comes in here in a second. Delayed. What's it upset about? Let's see. Oop, it's got its result. It just hasn't finished running. We're waiting. Keep refreshing. Oh, and it's successful. Awesome. So now if we come back in here and we scroll way over and we see what it came back on the actual, you actually see a 3 and the explanation's a little bit better. So now we can see like, hey, you know what? 3 and 4, not that bad. We're pretty close. We've gotten better. But as you can imagine, you can keep adding more and more records here, right? So you could say, you know, Wade Foster, he's the CEO at Zapier, and you can email him here if you have any complaints about the product, or myself. I'd love to hear from you. You can say, and then Zapier, and then we can say, you know what? We probably think that that's pretty low too. CEO isn't a great lead either. And we're going to see if, and you can see that we haven't run Zapier yet, so we don't have any results here. But what we can do is we can go ahead and click retest this prompt, and we'll wait for this to run again, right? It's got to run through, and you'll see it kind of kick through and come back into the table here in just a moment. And, you know, even though the instructions don't mention CEOs, I'm hoping the model is smart enough that we can say IC level leads are more what we're going for here. And it'll pick up that a CEO is probably not a great lead, right? That's what I'm hoping, but we will have to see if that's the case. Oop, it's successful. Let's come in and take a look. And hey, it did. It actually spit back a 4, which I think is fair because CEO is not the same as CTO. We explicitly said CTO. So I think this is like pretty decent overall. So not that bad. The other little bonus that I have here is I created these AI fields. And one of the cool things with tables is you can, instead of you personally doing the judging, where I'm going over here and I'm like personally saying like, okay, so this is my expected stuff. Here is what the prompt itself did. Seems pretty good. We're not too far off. I'm pretty happy with this. What you can do is actually make another field that's called an LLM-as-a-Judge field, where you ask the LLM to compare. You can say, hey, your task is to compare expected values to actual values. First, you should elaborate on what you're seeing, and then I want you to finish with the score. 10 out of 10 means perfect. 0 out of 10 means completely imperfect, incongruent, right? And we have this pass through, and you can see that we get another LLM saying, let me compare these things and kind of give you a score. And what it actually spits out here is a final score for how well do we think we're matching, right? A lot of scores we're about thrown around here. But the whole idea is, as I tweak and iterate on my prompt, I want to see these scores go up, or I want to go over here and I want to make sure that they're more equivalent, right? We want to make sure that they're getting more and less the same over time. And that's really kind of the heart of it. The last thing I'll do is just kind of reiterate. Actually, before I do that, when you're happy with this, right, you can always take this prompt and copy paste it over to your actual live production Zap and paste it in and turn it on. And you have a nice separation of the two different test modes and the real one as well. And as you collect leads here, you'll see them added in to your table. Some people decide that they don't want this step there. They don't want to collect them. They want to do it more manually, which is totally fine. But for this demo, as I run the real one, it'll add to it. Overall, what we're doing is we have a pretty standard lead scoring Zap. We cloned it, and then we replaced it with this table button and updating the score. And then we have this table that's capturing all the same input values, is capturing the expected output values that I provide, and then the actual output values that our prompt provides. And then we're comparing these and making sure that we're happy with the prompt performance over time. And if we're not, we might have to change that prompt. Sometimes we might even have to add more information into the form in order to get the kind of information that we need to get a good result. So definitely don't discount that. So with that, I'm going to pause for a second. And Matt, is there anybody that has questions that we should be answering?
There are a few questions, and there's some overall questions that I'll save for the end, but then there are some demo specific questions that I think I'll get to first. The first one I see here is from Becca, and Bryan, you kind of answered this just in a second ago as you were showing your, I guess I'll call it the production Zap versus your testing Zap. But Becca's question is, are you retesting the prompt because you're teaching it? And when you're done teaching it, you'll remove these retests?
That's a really good question, Becca. It's sometimes a little bit hard to wrap your head around. So I appreciate you asking. There's no dumb questions. The way that I think of this is that you're kind of training your GPT. This is commonly what I hear customers talk about when they say like, hey, I can't get it to work right. It takes a lot of time. I got to train my GPT. I think that's a good model to think about. What we're doing here is we're basically giving it a test, right? Imagine this table as a test. I know what the answers are, right? These are the expected values. Those are the answers. Here's the questions, right? Full name, email address, role. Each of these are different questions that you feed through it. And then we're saying, well, what did the AI respond? What did it answer? And then we can go in and we can grade it, right? We can say 4 versus 3, not bad. 2 versus 4, not bad either. And we can even go into some of the reasoning as to like why that was the case. You can go through and read this and understand why the model did that, which can give you some advice on some guidance on going back to type this in. Because if you see it, fixating on this or fixating on that, you might go back and actually add to your prompt. I know it's easy to like focus on this or focus on that, but don't do that. What I want you to do is X, Y, Z, and you can really work on training it. And then you can retest it with the new prompt, retest it with the new prompt until you're really happy. And then at that point you can say, okay, this prompt is really working well for me. I'm going to bring this over into the real Zap that's actually running live. And that's kind of when you graduate them, right? So if you go with this teaching analogy, we are, we're building all the test questions. We're creating the answer guide. We're seeing what they provide for the answers. We're going back and we're tweaking the prompt, the student, giving it more information on how to answer the questions. We're retesting by clicking that button. And then when we're finally happy, we graduate this prompt all the way over to the production Zap. Hopefully that helps, Becca.
Good stuff. That makes sense to me. Here's one from Drew. Does your AI, whatever it is, work well on whole complicated improvements, or is it better to keep clearly defined and extremely specific? And I assume the first part of that question is kind of about your AI by Zapier step. Is that agnostic? Are you choosing? And then the second part of it is about the prompt optimizations, I guess.
Yeah, it's a great question, Drew. Unfortunately, the answer is it depends. Unfortunately, what I have noticed is that complicated things tend to work pretty good if you use models like any of these reasoning models. So if you think GPT-5 is a pretty good place to start, those tend to be better at reasoning through complex instructions. So imagine like you got like almost like a sheet of rules, like if this happens, then that, if not this, da, 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 da. If you have a complex kind of workflow, kind of diagram that you can put into a prompt, then a reasoning model can handle some of those trickier, lots of things to consider sorts of things altogether. But that's not always like a given, right? You could be not giving it enough specificity in your prompt if it's not performing well, or you may not be giving it enough information, right? The silly example I often like to do is like, go ask ChatGPT what the name of your dog is. Well, it has no clue, right? It does not know that. So while that's a simple example, it does illustrate, like if I don't give some information about myself or whatever, it's not going to be able to reliably answer that. So if you wanted to do these comprehensive things, you got to make sure to give it enough information to sufficiently answer or perform the task. And you have to be clear enough and how you break down the thinking that it will take to get to that. And then the more complex that is, usually the more expensive the model is, right? The GPT-5s, the Sonnet 4s, things like that, the Gemini Pro, these are just a little bit more expensive, but they are quite a bit smarter, so to say. And if you have something that's very routine, you can usually get away with smaller models. And sometimes I see people split their steps up. So they might have a lead qualification one and a separate AI one and a separate one, and they'll sequence them together so that they're separate and they're standalone. I honestly, Drew, I would probably say the sweet spot is something like GPT-5 Mini. I bet you it can handle almost anything you throw at it, as long as you're not trying to like win, a gold medal in the math Olympiad or something. As long as you're doing something that's pretty straightforward and you can clearly explain it, you can give it enough information. GPT-5 Mini is going to do great. Sonnet's going to do great. Even some of the like Gemini Flash is going to do fantastic. So these are all, I think, totally reasonable. And if not, I would work on inputs. I would work on the prompt clarity. And then I would think, what if we split this apart? You can always drop in a new model. One thing that's really cool about this approach is if I want to see how this works with a different GPT, let's say a GPT, not mini, but I want to try the more expensive model, I can click that and then I can go over here and run them again and just kind of check the test results and say like, did it seem better this time? So these are all the things that I'd be trying. Unfortunately, there's no one size fits all, but hopefully a couple pointers for you to kind of get started and try a couple different things.
Good stuff. That makes sense to me. So this question isn't directly related to your demo. It's more kind of high level, but I think it's just such a good segue because you were just talking about all these different models and choosing reasoning models, choosing different providers, that it feels like a perfect segue. It's this question from Duncan. Don't mean to be out of place. Everyone would love to know. I know this is a reference to OpenAI Dev Day and the agent builder. How do you take yesterday's news?
Yeah, yesterday was, I think, really interesting. You see OpenAI trying to wrap their arm around building kind of these agentic workflows, and I thought it was really interesting. One big piece of the puzzle for us is those agent steps inside of their workflow builder. They allow you to hook up MCP, and that's like a big thing that Zapier offers. So if you do, Zapier MCP, you can kind of see our tooling here. Which allows you to hook up your ChatGPT or your agent steps to any of the different actions inside of Zapier, which gives the ability for that agent builder to go out and do stuff in the world, which I think is really exciting and something that we have been using a ton internally at Zapier. Beyond that, I think we're going to see more and more people get hip to the idea of automating stuff. Back to the point of the difference between chatting with an agent or an AI model. That means that you're sitting there at the keyboard, and if it tells you to send an email, well, you got to copy paste it out. And we're going to start moving slowly into this world where those models can actually do those things through MCP, having access to these tools so they can send the email, they can look up the lead, they can do some of this work. But then also you're going to start to see these things become less, hands on keyboard, right? And more, I'm running this in the background, right? So overall, I think we're pretty bullish on automation becoming more and more important, and AI making it easier and easier. So I think it's a very exciting time, and Zapier is like very complementary to a lot of the stuff that we saw. And the agent builder is really cool, but it requires you hook it to the API and have a front end and stuff. And in time, I think that'll get easier. But in the meantime, if you want to build workflows without writing code or deploying it somewhere, Zapier is still the sweet spot for a lot of our customers. But I think we're pretty excited. We got our agents product. So if you're really curious to use our agents product, that's a really cool one as well, that you kind of do more agentic workflows in kind of a chat style rather than a kind of a visual workflow builder style. So just a lot of problem space to explore still.
That all makes sense. And I was thinking about some of the conversations we had internally yesterday. It seems like a lot of folks that are building these agents like having, the options. They want to choose Gemini for this, or, I don't know, Sora or DeepSeek, or, there's just so many models for different use cases and cost. So having that agnostic model approach, sometimes people want that. On the other hand, if I know there's some things I saw with Agent Builder that was very cool, but I love that they pinned the Zapier MCP at the top. That the Agent Builder tool becomes so much cooler if one click into 8,000 plus integrations. So it definitely feels like a nice, better, but yeah, an interesting update. That was good stuff. Do you see any favorite questions here, Bryan, that you want to get to, or should I keep just grabbing my favorites here? How do you want to do this?
Yeah, just grab a couple. We've got a few more minutes, so I think we can sneak a couple more in there. I can start sharing.
Yeah, I see this one from Alicia. I'm excited and curious about MCP as described as App Connect. Any webinars coming up on MCP? I'll just let you talk about MCP generally.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great suggestion, Alicia. We definitely should do more there. We're really excited about MCP. We've been building a pretty expansive platform with all these apps and triggers and actions. And, we've been using them for workflows. So, you sequence these workflows and they're very deterministic and really reliable, right? You're not relying on the model making the right choice at any one moment. But exposing those actions as tools that anyone can use via MCP, I think is really exciting. And the thing I like to, if you're not familiar with MCP, there's this protocol that runs browsers called HTTP. And that's the way that your browser talks to all the servers, the Facebook servers and the Google servers, the ChatGPT, you name it, right? And while the spec is interesting, especially for nerds like me, like how does the HTTP work? Most people are really interested in the use cases. Like, okay, what can you do on top of it? Like browsers are cool, web servers are cool, HTTP is cool. But if I'm a normal person that just wants to get stuff done, like I want to go to Amazon, I want to order something. I want to go to Netflix, I want to watch. You know what I mean? Like you're more into that mode. And I think that's really where we're spending a lot of our attention is like, well, where are people finding value in this? And a lot of times we have people who are like, let's say a dev and they're working with Codex or they're working with Claude Code or any of these others agentic coding tools. And they want to expose tools to talk to Jira or talk to Slack or talk to any of the like GitLab or GitHub. And they want some of these kind of handheld experiences that just make it easy to pop in and pull that stuff, or maybe even custom stuff. Like, hey, I want to pull out some documentation here. I want to do this here. So I think that's where we're spending a lot of our time is just like, hey, how do we find those use cases that really resonate with folks? And I think a webinar would be a really fantastic way to highlight a handful of the things that we see customers doing. Because as you can imagine, there's some customers that are really going to the moon, building some awesome stuff. But it's a little bit hard to find those right now still. Everyone has to kind of provide their own spark of inspiration and creativity, which I think is sometimes tricky at this time.
Agreed. By the way, I have put into the chat, I know we have a Zapier plus Appify webinar that's coming up in a few weeks, and showcase during that is going to be lead gen and cold outreach, AI-powered customer support chat, and MCP servers and agentic workflows. Take a look at that. I just put that in the chat. Also, we've got an Anthropic. I'm less involved in the Anthropic webinar, but I know we have an Anthropic web MCP coming up in a few weeks. So keep an eye on that. We'll send emails out for that, but hopefully we'll get to see you all folks at those.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're probably here at time, Matt. Do you think we can sneak one more, or do we wrap?
Let's do one more here. I see this one's from Duncan. It's pretty highly rated. I'm a lifelong salesman. What do you think are some high value workflows for small businesses? How can I think about AI with helping businesses?
Yeah, that's a really great question. A lot of our use cases boil down to managing leads, and especially as you can imagine, like the context around leads. Like I want to add a note to this, this file. A lot of times an agentic flow is really nice just because I can say, maybe I can send a message and just say, hey, for this account, I want to add a note, whatever. If you're on the go, you're busy and you don't have time to go drill into the CRM to find that exact spot, that can be really, really useful. Speeding time to lead, right? Speed makes deals close. So that's a really big thing. Getting the right information at the right time, synthesizing that down into talking points that really resonate with the customers, and they're at the tip of your fingers, right? When you get ready to hop on that call. Those are all the kind of high value use cases that I see folks do. But by and far, I think just like lead intake is like a super big one. Zapier has great integrations with, let's say, Facebook lead ads, pulling those in and acting on those really, really fast. From the Google ad network, also kind of acting on those really quickly can be really, really game changing for folks. And I've seen people build some really awesome lead acquiring mechanisms where they're going out and fetching all these interesting data sources that you would never have thought to mine for leads. And they pull them in and they run them through the AI filters and say, not this, more like this. And they can really just take in, hundreds of different sources, whittle it down to just the things that they care about, and find those high quality diamonds in the rough, and kind of reach out to them with a ton of context. Like, hey, we saw this happen. We can offer this service, that's really timely and pertinent and personalized. Those are really, really exciting. And I see people do those all the time. And those would be the use cases that I think would be really fun to highlight more of, because it's one thing to say, yeah, capture leads, but like the devil's in the details. When you get some of these customers and some of the interesting stuff they're doing around pulling these leads in and making sure that they're qualified and the right thing, and how to, really personalize your outreach to them, it really, really kind of changes the way that they interact, and they're able to be way more successful as a result. But I think we need to do more inspiration on that front. I think that'd be really cool.
Good stuff. Awesome session, Bryan. Thank you so much. This was a really fun demo to watch. Thank you to our audience for sticking with us and asking so many really interesting questions. We really appreciate your time today. And we'll send out the recording. We'll send out some links to those upcoming sessions, and hopefully we will see you next time. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Bryan.
See y'all. Bye.